I don't know if I'm a ceramic artist. A few years ago, during an exhibition, someone said, "Your work feels entirely rooted in craft." I remember feeling strangely defensive. Not angry, not offended, just uncomfortable. And for a long time, I couldn't figure out why. A few years earlier, I had asked a friend the question, "What do you think is the difference between craft and contemporary art?" I expected an answer. Instead, she rejected the question itself. She told me that maybe the boundary was the problem. At the time, I didn't really understand what she meant, but somehow that conversation stayed with me. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that my discomfort wasn't coming from that comment. It was coming from me, because for a long time, I had accepted the idea that craft and contemporary art belong to different worlds. I studied sculpture in South Korea, and without really questioning it, I absorbed the distinctions around me. Craft, fine art, making, concepts, technique, discourse. Looking back, I think I accepted a hierarchy that I didn't even realize was there. Somewhere along the way, I started believing that contemporary art was somehow more important. The strange thing is that I love craft. I admire the patience it required, the discipline, the years of practice, the relationship between the maker and their material. I respect all of it, and yet I still carry that hierarchy inside me. Then I started working with clay, and clay forced me to rethink a lot of things, because making ceramics taught me something I hadn't fully understood before. Technique is never just technique. Every decision carries a way of thinking, a way of paying attention, a way of seeing. The boundary between making and thinking suddenly felt much clearer. Around the same time, I started reading more about the history of art and craft, and I realized something. The boundary I had taken for granted wasn't nearly as natural as I thought. It was something people created, which also means it can change. That realization followed me into another question: graduate school. As I looked at programs in Korea and abroad, I noticed differences in the way art education was structured. Many Korean schools are still organized around mediums: ceramics, sculpture, metalwork, painting. And I want to be careful here. This isn't criticism. It's simply the environment I experienced. But the more my own practice expanded, the harder it became to fit inside a single category. I make ceramics, but I also write. I make books. I build installations. I spend just as much time thinking about memory, language, and absence as I do thinking about clay. And because of that, I found myself drawn to programs that began with question rather than materials. Maybe that's one of the reasons I started looking beyond Korea. At some point, being called a ceramic artist no longer felt like the whole story. Not because I stopped making ceramics. If anything, clay became even more important to me, but it stopped being the only language I was using. So, when people ask me whether I am a ceramic artist, I honestly don't know how to answer. Maybe I am, maybe I'm not. What I do know is that clay became one of the ways I understand the world, a very important one, not the only one. I write, I make books, I build objects, I follow questions, and somehow all of those things feel connected. Maybe my friend was right all those years ago. Maybe the more interesting question is not where the boundary is. Maybe more interesting question is why we were so eager to draw one in the first place. Maybe that's why I don't know if I'm a ceramic artist. Not because I don't work with clay, but because clay is no longer the whole story. Maybe what I'm searching it for isn't craft, and maybe it isn't contemporary art either. Maybe I'm simply trying to find a language large enough to hold everything I care about. For now, clay is part of that language, but only part of it.